World War II was a global conflict that engulfed nearly every corner of the world from 1939 to 1945. It was a period marked by intense battles, strategic maneuvers, and a relentless drive for dominance by the major powers involved. It was a war of unprecedented scale and destruction, with battles fought on land, sea, and air, stretching from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Southeast Asia. The war left an enduring impact on the course of human history, altering the political, social, and economic landscapes of nations around the globe. The war pitted the Axis powers, led by Germany, Italy, and Japan, against the Allies, primarily Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and China. This clash of ideologies and ambitions created a volatile and deadly environment. Millions of soldiers and civilians lost their lives, with countless others suffering injuries and trauma that would last a lifetime. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, their infrastructures obliterated, and their populations displaced. The world had never seen such widespread devastation and loss of life, a grim testament to the destructive power of modern warfare. The seeds of this global conflict were sown in the aftermath of World War I, a war that was supposed to be the war to end all wars. The Treaty of Versailles, intended to ensure peace, instead created resentment and instability. It imposed harsh penalties on Germany, fostering a sense of injustice and a desire for revenge. Germany, burdened by crippling reparations and territorial losses, became fertile ground for extremist ideologies. The economic hardships and national humiliation created a breeding ground for radical movements. Meanwhile, economic depression gripped the world, exacerbating tensions and fueling the rise of nationalism. Countries turned inward, focusing on their own survival and interests. Against this backdrop of global turmoil, a new generation of leaders emerged, some driven by ambition, others by desperation. These leaders would play pivotal roles in the unfolding drama of World War II. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose to power, promising to restore German glory and avenge the humiliation of defeat. Hitler's charismatic leadership and propaganda captivated a nation in despair. Hitler's expansionist ambitions, fueled by a toxic mix of nationalism and racial ideology, would ultimately plunge the world into another devastating war. His vision of a greater Germany led to aggressive territorial expansion. The world watched with growing apprehension as Hitler's Germany rearmed and expanded its territory, violating the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Each violation went unchecked, emboldening Hitler further. The League of Nations, formed in the wake of World War I to prevent future conflicts, proved powerless to stop him. Its inability to enforce its resolutions highlighted the weaknesses of international diplomacy at the time. The stage was set for another global conflagration, one that would test the limits of human endurance and reshape the geopolitical landscape for generations to come. The world braced itself for a conflict that would redefine the 20th century and beyond. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, officially ended World War I. This monumental event was meant to bring about a new era of peace and stability in Europe and the world. Leaders from the Allied powers gathered in the opulent Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles to put their signatures on the document that they believed would prevent future conflicts. However, instead of fostering lasting peace, it sowed the seeds of discontent and resentment that contributed to the outbreak of World War II. The treaty's terms were seen as excessively punitive by many, particularly in Germany, where the population felt humiliated and betrayed. This sense of injustice and anger simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right conditions to erupt. The treaty imposed harsh penalties on Germany, holding it solely responsible for the war and demanding heavy reparations. These reparations were not just financial, but also territorial and military. Germany was forced to cede significant territories to neighboring countries, which not only reduced its landmass, but also its economic resources. Germany lost significant territory, its military was severely restricted, and its economy was crippled by war debt. The loss of territories such as Alsace-Lorraine to France and the creation of the Polish corridor left many Germans feeling vulnerable and exposed. The once proud German military was reduced to a mere shadow of its former self, with strict limitations on the number of troops, tanks, and aircraft it could maintain. This humiliation and resentment created a fertile breeding ground for extremist ideologies, including the Nazi Party, which capitalized on nationalistic sentiment and promised to restore German pride and power. The Nazis, led by Adolf Hitler, used the widespread discontent to their advantage, portraying themselves as the saviors of the German nation. They promised to overturn the Treaty of Versailles, reclaim lost territories, and rebuild the military. The treaty's impact extended beyond Germany, redrawing national borders and creating new states in Europe. Countries like Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia were formed, while others saw significant changes to their boundaries. These new borders often ignored the complex ethnic and cultural landscapes of the regions, leading to friction and conflict among different groups. However, these changes often disregarded ethnic and cultural ties, leading to tensions and instability in the newly formed nations. In many cases, minority groups found themselves living under new governments that were indifferent or even hostile to their needs and aspirations. This created a volatile environment where nationalist movements and separatist sentiments could easily take root. The League of Nations, established to prevent future wars, proved ineffective in addressing the underlying issues that fueled international conflict. Despite its noble intentions, the League lacked the authority and the means to enforce its resolutions. Major powers like the United States chose not to join, weakening the League's influence from the outset. Its lack of military power and the unwillingness of major powers to commit to collective security undermined its authority. Without a unified commitment to peacekeeping, the League was unable to prevent aggressive actions by countries like Japan, Italy, and Germany in the years leading up to World War II. The global economic depression of the 1930s further exacerbated tensions and weakened democratic institutions. The Great Depression led to widespread unemployment, poverty, and social unrest. Governments struggled to cope with the economic crisis, and many people lost faith in democratic processes and institutions. The economic hardship and social unrest created a climate of fear and uncertainty, making extremist ideologies more appealing to desperate populations. In this environment, political movements that promised quick and radical solutions gained traction. People were willing to support authoritarian leaders who promised to restore order and provide for their basic needs. In Germany, the Nazi Party exploited the economic crisis to gain support, promising to restore order and prosperity. They used propaganda to blame the country's woes on the Treaty of Versailles, the Weimar Republic, and various minority groups, particularly Jews. This scapegoating provided a convenient explanation for the suffering of ordinary Germans and diverted attention from the Nazis' own radical agenda. Hitler's message of national revival and scapegoating of minorities resonated with many Germans disillusioned with the status quo. His charismatic leadership and promises of a return to greatness struck a chord with a population desperate for change. The Nazis' rise to power was facilitated by their ability to tap into the deep-seated grievances and fears of the German people. The combination of the Treaty of Versailles' legacy, the rise of nationalism, and the global economic depression created a perfect storm for another world war. The unresolved issues from World War I, coupled with the new economic and political crises, set the stage for a conflict even more devastating than the first. The international system, weakened by economic turmoil and political instability, was ill-equipped to contain the growing threat of aggressive expansionism. The failure of the League of Nations and the reluctance of major powers to intervene allowed totalitarian regimes to pursue their ambitions unchecked. The stage was set for a new generation of leaders, driven by ambition and fueled by resentment, to plunge the world into another devastating conflict. Leaders like Hitler, Mussolini, and Tojo capitalized on the weaknesses of the international system and the discontent of their populations to pursue aggressive expansionist policies, ultimately leading to the outbreak of World War II. Fascism, a far-right, authoritarian, and ultra-nationalist political ideology, cast a long shadow over Europe in the years leading up to World War II. This ideology, characterized by dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, and strong regimentation of society and the economy, found fertile ground in the political and economic instability of post-World War I Europe. In Italy, Benito Mussolini and his National Fascist Party seized power in 1922, promising to restore order and revive Roman glory. Mussolini's charismatic leadership and promises of a return to greatness resonated with a population disillusioned by economic hardship and political chaos. Mussolini's regime glorified violence, suppressed opposition, and pursued aggressive foreign policy, invading Ethiopia in 1935. This invasion was part of Mussolini's broader strategy to build a new Roman Empire, showcasing the regime's militaristic and expansionist ambitions. However, it was in Germany that fascism found its most dangerous expression, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler. Hitler's rise was marked by his ability to tap into the deep-seated grievances and fears of the German people, promising a return to national greatness and the rectification of the perceived injustices of the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's Nazi Party, driven by a toxic mix of nationalism, anti-Semitism, and racial superiority, exploited the economic and social turmoil of the 1930s to gain power. The Great Depression had left millions unemployed and desperate, creating fertile ground for Hitler's radical ideas and promises of economic revival and national rejuvenation. Hitler's ideology, outlined in his book Mein Kampf, My Struggle, called for the expansion of German territory, the unification of all German-speaking peoples, and the elimination of Jews and other groups deemed racially inferior. This book became the blueprint for the Nazi agenda, laying out a vision of a racially pure and territorially expansive German state. Hitler's rise to power in 1933 marked a turning point in the path to war. Once in power, Hitler moved swiftly to consolidate his control, using both legal and extra-legal means to eliminate political opposition and establish a dictatorship. He quickly consolidated his authority, dismantling democratic institutions and establishing a totalitarian state. The Reichstag fire of 1933 provided a pretext for the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended civil liberties and allowed for the arrest of political opponents. Rearmament became a top priority, violating the restrictions imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's regime embarked on a massive rearmament program, rebuilding the military and preparing for future territorial expansion. Hitler's expansionist ambitions, fueled by his belief in German dominance, became increasingly clear. He believed that Germany had a right to expand its territory to provide Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people. In 1938, Germany annexed Austria in the Anschluss, a bloodless takeover that violated the Treaty of Versailles but was met with weak international response. This event marked the first major step in Hitler's aggressive expansionist policy. Emboldened by this success, Hitler turned his attention to Czechoslovakia, demanding the Sudetenland, a region with a large German population. He used the pretext of protecting ethnic Germans to justify his demands, further testing the resolve of the international community. The Munich Agreement, signed by Germany, Italy, Great Britain, and France in September 1938, ceded the Sudetenland to Germany in an attempt to appease Hitler and avoid war. This policy of appeasement was driven by the desire to maintain peace at almost any cost, but it ultimately failed to curb Hitler's ambitions. However, this act of appeasement only emboldened Hitler, who went on to occupy the rest of Czechoslovakia in March 1939. The occupation of Czechoslovakia demonstrated that Hitler's ambitions could not be contained by diplomatic means, setting the stage for the outbreak of World War II.